everyone, welcome and thanks for watching. I'm Noorsheen Mohammed and I head up D&I for Oliver Bernard. I also run Diversity in London, the Meetup group. So over the next few weeks, I'll be speaking with various technology leaders, bringing their views on D&I and what they believe action is needed. Today, I am very excited to be speaking with Kish Hirani, who has over 25 years experience in the games industry. So thanks for joining us. So just to give you a bit of background on Kish, he began his career as a software engineer and moved into various technical director roles at development studios and publishing houses like Acclaim, THQ, BBC Multimedia. He then moved to platform holders, starting with Microsoft, and then settled at Sony PlayStation for 8 years, where he worked as their head of developer services. So I'm sure he can bring a wealth of knowledge and experience from there. He is now the CTO of a startup and consultancy and sits on multiple advisory boards. He's a massive D&I advocate. He's the founding chair of BAME in games. He's listed in the Financial Times as one of the top 100 most influential BAME leaders in UK tech 2019, and the list goes on. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Kish to speak. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kish. And let's get started off by talking about why diversity matters to you.
First of all, diverse talent, it has to be a business case, because you lose the audience, the leaders and everybody else if it becomes like you have to do it because it's the right thing, which is a good excuse, but it has to make business sense. So, diversity brings together a diverse viewpoint, different viewpoints, and makes better diverse products. It brings in innovation, and that is the heart of any creative, I think any industry, but especially creative and tech industry. If you don't have innovation and products which are diverse, then suddenly you just become a stale org, which will pretty much almost have to refreshen up every couple of years or so. But if you have diverse talent, you suddenly got this amazing products coming out, which is targeting multiple audience, and you survive a lot better, because not all of those will be successful, but you've got a better chance of surviving this new sort of world where innovation is the key, because everybody's now flooded with amazing products. So you have to step up your game. And so it's almost a no-brainer. It makes business sense to have a diverse talent.
So on that point about it makes business sense, obviously, I think that's a lot of organisations understand that today. I'm presuming, there might be challenges around getting leadership teams on board with D&I. I'm sure that leaders across all organisations, there's leaders that do understand the importance of it. But there may be cases where it's not set as a priority, it's not right up there. What would your advice be to getting leadership teams on board with D&I, or and not just on board with D&I, but really prioritising this?
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on. It needs to come from the top. That is almost, there's no other sort of counter ways to tackle this at all whatsoever. Some of the easy ways, and this is a no-brainer, every leadership team should go through unconscious bias training. A lot of this will suddenly highlight things you just didn't realize. And as you just said, majority of the individuals want inclusion, diversity, believe in it, want to make better teams, but they don't realize some of the actions they are doing are counterproductive just because they have no unconscious bias trainings. And it's just more because, classic human behavior is you are more likely in the interview, so make up your mind, you're hiring a certain person within the first minute or so, speaking to them and their appearance, etc. And that a lot of unconscious biases come through that. They've not even probably got a chance to speak yet or so. And being aware of that suddenly then brings you as a better leader, because then you've got this thing which is otherwise controlling you subconsciously and making decision even without realizing. So that to me is a key. Another key would be attend uh, DNI meets. If you've, it's been delegate, I mean, if you're lucky enough and got a DNI officer who's hired, if you're a large enough organization, that's great. But otherwise, it's always left to HR. And a lot of organizations, especially in the video games industry, if they're not that big or so, it's down to somebody who's a minority. If it's gender, then it's a female who sets up a DNI group or so, and then just let them run. And that's not good enough. To bring them on board, attend that together with them, let them lead, obviously, but being in that meeting suddenly brings the message of this is right coming on the top from the leadership itself who are genuinely interested in this, as opposed to we have to do this, right? I've got a division who can handle that, and off it goes. So that for me, I think, any leader, it's a must. And a last one, which it's a very simple exercise. Actually, this is more practical rather than just giving a pro. In this sort of meets, so I think if you've never done this as a leader, attend a DNI meet, empower whoever is leading and let them lead, but run something called start, stop, continue. And this is you can do with your entire team, and let the team basically set up 3 tables, 3 whiteboards, whatever else exercise you think would be easy to communicate this. Could be electronic, but start would be a board area where everybody puts down type of behaviors, type of uh, actions, certain things we want to start at our workplace which is not happening, things we want to stop, toxic behaviors, anything else we want to stop or so. It has to be anonymous, by the way, as in posted cards or something where people just put on there. And then what behaviors you see are great, it's fantastic, let's continue that. What you will find is that the start list will be quite long, stop list will be quite long, and continue will be just average. And I've done this a number of times, and it's always the case, which is not a bad thing. It just means there's so much work to do as well. And being part of that, you as a leadership team will realize what people are thinking and
Yeah.
what's not happening as such yet.
In those meetings that you do with that exercise, is it who's involved in those? Is it just the leadership teams, or are there other staff from kind of different departments involved in those meetings as well?
It has to be everybody. And in fact, it's a good point you raised there. And maybe we could talk about this a bit later on as well. But the worst you could do on that is having, so for example, if it's a more gender diversity group or so, just have only females in that group. So it's almost everybody who's feels there's an issue is the bubble which is sitting in there. You need everybody to be involved in this. Diversity should be, and again, not many organizations probably are still doing this, but there are certain organizations where it becomes, it has to be done after work or something. There's a cultural awareness meet, it'll be after at 5 o'clock or so. No, it should be part of your work meeting. It shouldn't be a lunchtime exercise. It should be a business meetings set up. But I would say with certain things like this, there are other reasons, but let's not go into that, where you need to have a safe space meetup, say for gender. So, but otherwise, I think this is something you should be, the entire team should be meeting together.
Yeah, and do you think it should be led from the top, from the senior leadership team should be, involved and almost chairing those and actively involved in those meetings?
They should be actively involved. They don't need to chair this. Again, if you've got a qualified DNI director, so they would be leading that. Something like start, stop, and continue is actually better not led by a leader, because then the message is that it's for everybody, and the leader should be taking part as well. So suddenly, yeah, I think they should be on the side, but being in a meeting suddenly brings that message that this leadership team actually cares about this diversity, as opposed to it's delegated, it's their problem.
Okay. All right. So I want to find out a little bit more about the games industry specifically. So what does D&I in the games industry look like? What are the stats, and what have you seen? What have you seen the industry has done to kind of see changes, D&I changes across it?
So we are very similar in terms of other creative industry like film, music, TV. In fact, statistics, as you mentioned, video games industry now in the 3 years running in UK, Europe, and US as well is similar. Uh, the revenue for video games industry is greater than film, TV, and music industry combined. All those
Oh, wow.
combined. That's how much it's generating in terms of revenue now.
Yeah.
But having said that, it is such an infant young industry. So video games industry in Britain is about 40 years old. And I'll correct that. It's actually 30 years old officially because that's when the very first trade body was formed. Before that, it was just it's video games and you could buy video games. So it's not that young,
Yeah.
but and this is where I'm leading to that. It took us until 2019 when we did the very first census in the video games industry in Britain to know who's actually working in the video games industry. Prior to that, the film sector, the screen sectors, and a couple of others used to consider video games as part of the census, and you'd have about 100 people take part, and they would say, four people said they're minority, and suddenly the stats became there's 4% ethnic minority in the video games industry. So we actually hadn't a clue, and you can't bring about changes until you know what you're trying to change and what data and figures they are, which maps your industry as such. So I think in every other industry, if anybody else is looking at this, if there's no data, push your trade bodies to actually have census to find out who exactly is in the industry, because that's how you can change. So we did that, and so it was early last year, actually. Wow, you always lose track of time when you go in something like lockdown. So
Yeah.
it was just early last year we announced the census, and it was 10% ethnic minority in the video games industry, 28% female, and we had 70% male, which is shouldn't be that surprising, and 2% others, which was actually quite interesting. 2% is actually higher than normal average of others in terms of gender. Um, so in terms of ethnic minority, 10%, that's low. And that's something which we should work towards, and that's where BAME Games really came about to be. But it's difficult to have such organizations where, yeah, it's the right thing to do until you know the figures you're playing with. So, and now this is where you get to when you start your census. So so this is going to be carried out every 2 years now. And so it'll be next year when we will do another census. And so you'll get some sort of a correlations between the figures. The first one is always you promote it heavily as well. So the sudden figures, it's good. You've got a credible sample, fantastic, but it's still not that accurate. It's 2 years after when you do your next, where you get some sort of correlation, and then 2 years after that is exactly when you can start building. Are there any trends? You can do a lot more data research or so. So data is so important, which we finally got that. But having said that, the industry has been self-policing almost pretty much from the beginning, because there's not been that much of a uh, higher up organizations policing how video games goes. And I mean, that can be taken as a bad thing in certain areas where it's used. Classic example is like there's lots of free to play games, and then small link to addictions of video games. And but on the positive side, a lot of this, for example, one thing which I'm really proud of our industry is in 2006, the biggest video games conference, the only it's a small industry, so there's only one, takes place in LA. It's called E3, and they banned booth babes in 2006. Now that was well ahead of any of this sort of happening, and it's actually frowned upon now in the video games industry. Although we've seen these changes come into Formula One and few where it never was needed. The audience never cared about that, but it was always that the predominant audience or the predominant customer is male, so this is what it should be. And then suddenly it becomes like that's just the norm. So it was completely stopped, and since then I haven't come across in the 25 years I've been there, but as I said, since 2006, I haven't come across a conference show where actually they use booth babes to attract product. It's probably this is video games or so. So there's some amazing things which we have achieved as an industry in that. Um, Another key thing about the video games industry is perception, and this is going to remain, unfortunately, is the classic perception there was way back in the rock and roll days, where if something bad happens, oh, they were listening to hip hop music, or movie industry has been through that. They were seeing violent movies, hence they did. When people don't understand why certain individual did certain thing, they like to put it onto a blame sort of sector or so. And video games has had a fair share of that. It's like video games, that's why I got to that. People don't want to get to the root cause of the issue of individuals, so they target that. And we thought that with social media, video games industry will get a break, and it'll be like the film and the music, and people will start picking the new norm, which is, oh, it's because they're on social media and that's where they've learned whatever they've learned or so. But video games is so one innovative and inclusive. It's adopted social media within games. So, get your games have chats and everything else in there. So I can't see this industry, which is continuously adaptive to anything new which comes along, which could be possibly right. Yeah, that's the younger generation doing it. I think we are in forever, and I think everybody in our industry are fully aware of that as well. That this is something which we have to live with. So where it becomes with individual like myself and everybody else as ambassadors of the industry is to change that perception. And this is really matters, because that's how you bring in diversity and inclusion, because your teachers, your parents, your mentors, anybody who can influence you at a young age, telling you, no, get a proper job. And especially when you're ethnic minority, and nothing wrong with that, your parents want the best for you.
Yeah.
And video games, unfortunately, and to a great extent, a lot of the creative sector is very similar. Film, TV, music, I guess. Get a proper job, not you're a lawyer, accountant, doctors, etc., as opposed to video games. So we're still quite in that sort of early stage of changing that perception. What's really helped is things like mobile phones, which have got video games on there. So every parent, every person, I would say, now is carrying a video games console and are playing Candy Crush and that sort of games. So they actually understand what this industry is sort of all about,
Yeah.
but we're sort of getting there.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, I've always considered gaming, even just the kind of customers that you attract, to be mainly men. But I'm seeing more, even just like from going to the shops or seeing, at the moment I'm not going to the shops, but just seeing like more games, the types of games that are coming out. I personally have seen or heard about more females being interested in actually as consumers playing games.
And you mentioned shops, but now everything's gone digital with your phone. The shops are e-shops. You don't even need to get anywhere. And I'm going to mess this up, but there's this amazing, interesting quote, which it's especially about women discovery. So the video games industry didn't realize, oh, God, I've got it wrong. Okay, let me just describe it, and then this is the best we go. So the industry didn't, it was women who basically discovered they play games, as opposed to the industry discovering that we need to make the games for women, basically. So there's a better quote to that, but I wish I could have got that, nailed it right. And that's the case, that it wasn't, a lot of the perception is that they started making more diverse games, and that's why female are attracted. No, but it was the other way around. Women tend to, and they've got statistics on this, women tend to spend more money on free-to-play games and sort of microtransactions, as opposed to male, and this is just stereotyping sort of by majority, tend to be more playing the bigger sort of one-off payment games or so. And the more money is actually made in those microtransactions. So games like Candy Crush and they've got lots of microtransactions, that tends to attract more of a female audience. Unfortunately, that could be a bad thing as well, because just means a lot of this money is being spent but everybody enjoys it. So
Yeah, no,
yes.
it's interesting to hear that. So, but coming back to D&I and challenges, I want to kind of draw more upon like what challenges you have specifically faced across D&I in the leadership team. They could be personal or professional even,
Yep.
or combination. And how have you overcome these or found ways to overcome these?
So I'll tell you the key one, which we have, and we've had it in BAME games, and I think a lot of workplaces will have this as well. So, is how do you encourage and include the majority? So when you say 10% is ethnic minority, why do you want to exclude the 90% who can help you make that difference? And out of those 90%, a good 98% of those want to help, and it might be that 2% who are just I don't care, or are probably on the extreme end, or are the classic sort of who just don't care about diversity, or are probably racist, etc.
Yeah.
Very, very tiny minority, but the majority, and a classic word which is used is allies. How do you include them? And it's not that simple. It's a big challenge, because it's not a matter of you just saying, so I'll give you an example with BAME games. We have our monthly meetup and it's open for everybody, but majority of the individuals who attend are ethnic minority, and you want to have it. So it's almost like uh, a diverse audience preaching to themselves that we need to be diverse, and you can't bring about changes if you're not going to include the majority who will help you are in those positions, especially senior positions. And this goes with gender as well. You cannot just have changes in gender balance at workplaces. So if you're going to exclude the majority of the men who are dominating those spaces and bringing them into these meetings to say why we need that diversity. So it's something we haven't managed to solve. There are a couple of things which we have done. For example, in our monthly meetups, we explicitly state BAME Games monthly meetup is for everybody who cares about diversity. And that's important. That empowers a lot of individuals who, from the goodness of their heart, feel, oh, if I go into that meeting, I'm taking up somebody's space. And that's a terrible perception to have, which is not a bad thing, but it comes from a good place saying, no, maybe it's their thing. I should step away from that. And empowering everybody that diversity is for everybody to solve. It's key. We haven't solved it yet, and we continue to do that. But getting your allies on board, it's also personally a challenge I've also taken up to make sure, one, you recognize as well that there are these amazing individuals, people who have got qualifications in diversity. Just because they're the wrong gender or wrong color doesn't mean you have to dismiss them.
Interesting. I mean, I guess that if you was to hear a meetup called BAME Games, naturally you would think if you weren't fit, if you didn't fit into the BAME category, you wouldn't feel that you should go. But you're right. You need allies, and the message needs to go across to everyone in the industry.
Absolutely. And same with workplaces. If you've got a group which is a diversity group, you will find it very difficult to actually have the majority then attend that. And then you set up, for example, if it's just ethnic minorities, and then you have a social meet, so which is set as the ethnic minority culture awareness meet. So you'll find a lot of the majority will then not attend, and that's the audience you really want to attract to show how things are different. So it has to be you have to have a diverse team, which means you have to include the majority. Just don't make a diverse team by having the minority then talk amongst themselves and try to bring a change.
So, I mean, obviously you said that it's not something that you've been able to, there hasn't been a solution to that yet. And I think allyship is very important around that. Even maybe training, allyship training, and to encourage people to go to these groups, even if they're not, don't feel that they fit into that category. They
need to be part of that change. And,
yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. So, apart from that, aside from that, any other challenges that you've faced as a leader?
No, so I think this is a very interesting one because when after I was made redundant at Sony, I had some time and I basically decided to pack up and go away to Kenya, where I was born, for a month and do charity work. And that's where sort of I had a bit of wake up that I could contribute so much of more to the industry. And that's where we formed Gaming Games. It's just a very good timing. 5 years ago, that's when we formed that. And that's always been sort of at workplace. I'm a good, again, I had that same as we started earlier. I felt, I was a very good leader. I had a very diverse team in terms of hiring. So, but a lot of that, I think individuals need to contribute back and talk about this quite openly. And that's how you bring about changes. And it took me, well, good 20 years to realize that I actually need to, because you go into work in a meeting room, and I'm sure you're exactly the same. The first thing doesn't come to mind, in your case, I'm a female and I am ethnic minority. No, like what we're going to talk about today, work, and it's always work, and you get on. You're uh, so being diverse, so it's not something which is on the forefront of anybody's agenda on a daily basis as such or so, and but how that actually helps everybody else is something which took me a long time to realize.
Yeah.
And now just by talking about diversity and looking different empowers a lot of individuals who are probably very similar in the early stage of their career, like probably me, not sure if this industry is right for me or not. So, and that's how you bring about changes to be able to that visual sort of presence. It's something which is very difficult for anybody else to replicate.
Yeah.
And maybe I should probably just add that this is where leadership can really help. Nominate your staff for awards, diversity awards or so, because a lot of, especially when you're minority, and everybody's very humble, nobody wants to sort of nominate themselves for like a diversity award, etc. So somebody's doing good, get them out there, get them more exposure, same internally as well, give them that recognition.
Absolutely. How many, just, I mean, we're starting to wrap up, but just out of interest, how many conversations did you find at Sony, at PlayStation, or in previous companies you've worked for? How many conversations are happening about diversity in leadership meetings?
So when I was there at Sony, I don't think there was a single meet I attended, which was that. Uh, it, this is a funny uh, fact. Is I was once I formed Gaming Games organization, and I think in year two or so, I was invited back at Sony to give a talk about diversity, and I could have been I could have started it up funny, which I didn't, and I could have just said, right, stop making diverse people redundant. Then no, it's just multiple divisions,
Yeah,
and so I mean, a key thing is, like with most of us, you don't burn bridges where you live or so. So my relations with Sony and the entire industry is tiny, has always been fantastic. So I always get invited back, but it's only recently this thing has become a lot more discussed, which is a good thing. And I think maybe I could just say that a lot of this changes come about, and which is it's all positive, but a lot of companies and things change just because the law requires you to. And so there are a couple of three things which I'll put there is why wait for these sort of things to come into place? Why don't you lead and be ahead of that? So one, I just say, a law forces you suddenly. A classic example is gender pay gap. It will take years and years before we get that parity. I think in the Western world, Iceland is probably going to be the first country which will attend that in the next couple of years. I think Britain has been projected in the next 20 years when we'll have a complete full uh, gender equality pay gap. I can't think of any company right now who's probably not paying the same amount or so. But again, it takes a while. So why wait for that law? You could have done that 20 years ago. Secondly, your investors and money. Money always comes along. This is something which, if you're an investor or in that position, or in a position where you can get uh, anybody, your clients, etc., look at what that diversity is. Talk about diversity. Invest in projects which are diverse. So, and that's how you bring, because money makes such a difference in that way. And then finally, which I sort of mentioned a couple of the times, it's the recognition and awards. And a lot of, especially the video games industry, and even film industry, like BAFTA as an organization has done this or so, but recognizing that diverse team are the ones you should be factored in when you're giving out awards, or not giving out, but at least giving out nominations, or applying for certain awards or so. So things like that, recognition certainly makes a big difference to everybody.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think that that wraps it up. I think we've got some really good insight there into not just diversity, D&I across the gaming industry, but there's definitely some points there that every industry can take. So thank you so much for doing that, for providing us with your insight.
Most welcome.